Welcome along to Live on Air this evening. It's my great privilege to have Mike Paterson with us. Tell us about how you got started in working life in New Zealand.
I'd done sort of student jobs. I was at Auckland University, and I'd done the sort of usual student jobs. The first job when I graduated, I was actually working for New Zealand Express Company, and we were stacking sugar bags, paper sugar bags, over at the sugar works there at
Chelsea.
Yeah. And I was getting sugar rashes on my neck from the sweat and the heat. So I thought there's got to be an easier way to make a living. And about 6 or 8 months before this, I had led a demonstration on the New Zealand Herald because of their reporting of Vietnam and so on. It was very slanted, as you might imagine. And another guy and I had actually got into the Herald building. They'd brought all the big steel doors down and everything. And Robin Slade and Neil Illingworth, both passed on. Robin Slade drowned in a swimming pool or something, I don't know. Anyway, but they're long gone. But they said, the only way to change the Herald is from within. So from Chelsea, I went into the Herald one day, and I saw the deputy editor, Noel Chappell, who was a very quiet and very polite, very gracious guy. I couldn't understand what he was asking me in the interview because he was talking like this. But he would always hint as to whether he wanted a yes or a no, so I just went along with the signals, body language. And then as we were leaving, we were walking out of this office where I'd just been interviewed, and not sure whether I'd had an interview or not, he said, Mr. Paterson, do you have a more conservative tie? To which I, of course, said, yeah, I'm so sorry, this silly rag, yes, of course I do. And then the next thing I knew was that I got a call on the Sunday from the chief reporter there saying, where in hell are you? You're supposed to be here at 2 o'clock and it's now 3:30. Do you want your job or don't you? I hadn't been told whether I had. So anyway, I flew in there. I got set down behind a typewriter and was given nothing to do for about 3 days. And then I got sick of that, and I went and I wrote a story about the difficulties of teaching pigeons left from right in the psych labs at Auckland University. And that was published, and that was my first foray into journalism, was with pigeons. And rather than changing the Herald changed me quite radically. I've been studying anthropology and psychology, and here was just this sort of dream of kind of meeting all the kinds of people you would want to meet, of talking with them, of asking them not just polite questions, but awkward questions as well. And you're meeting politicians, you're meeting business leaders, you're meeting sports leaders, you're meeting just an incredible number of people. And a variety of personalities, a variety of, what would you say, integrity, if you like. But people with different motives, different values, different goals in life.
So it must have been quite a radical change from being a student protest. I don't know whether you were a leader, but doing all sorts of anti-establishment things, and then you're suddenly catapulted into the working environment of what at that stage would have been a very conservative newspaper, I would imagine, and you rose up through and did the sub-editor's course and were a senior journalist.
Yeah, I think, you see, journalists are interesting creatures because you're an outsider. You at that time you weren't allowed to join a political party, for example, as a Herald staff member. The finished product looked pretty conservative, but when you got the journos together, there's a kind of a camaraderie there. You work absolutely wild hours. I mean, crazy hours. You got away from the Herald about 2 o'clock in the morning often. And then you go to the press club and you banter for an hour or two over a few beers. So by the time you got home, you were pretty well wired, as well as having had a few beers. So you would be loquacious as well, and your poor partner would have to put up with you bouncing into the house at 4 a.m. just wired. So not many people, a lot of journalists' marriages fail pretty quickly, but I was fortunate and my wife put up with me. And then she became a minister. That gave me a bit of a jolt too when that happened.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine that.
I moved out, basically. Well, except I never have either.
Mike, our viewers might be interested to note the fact that you're talking about these long hours to early hours of the morning. Well, here I am sitting in Auckland in New Zealand Standard Time, and it's a very respectable 7:10 in the evening. Whereas for you, it's some ungodly hour in the wee small hours in Canada. What is it?
3:15.
3:15. Now,
right now.
So very soon you'll be due to wake up. Is that right?
Well, yeah, another 3 hours or so.
Another 3 hours, yeah. Mike?
But I'm a writer, you see. As a writer, I find I don't know. I sleep when I sleep, and I write when I'm not sleeping, hopefully.
Okay, so we've got different work patterns, but Mike, from New Zealand, you've had this love affair with Canada and also Scotland, and your work as a journalist took you into a fascinating field in Scotland. But first of all, you had a bit of a brief foray into trying to do a doctorate at Queen's University in Canada. And so what was that about? And then how did you get over to Scotland, and what did you do there?
Queen's, I was interested in the psychology of language. And I was supposed to have one supervisor, and that didn't happen. And I wound up on a team project. It was something about doing something like testing the recovery rates of this optic nerve of a Latin American snail or something like that. It was as far from my interests as I could imagine, although I didn't have anything against the snails. But I mean, when I got to Scotland, I had no intention of doing any further academic work. I was kind of a bit shy of it, really. It didn't seem to do much for people in terms of the satisfactions that I look for. But then through my work, my journalism, and I was writing about Scotland for various publications and so on, and I went to interview this professor of Scottish history, Ted Cowan, at Glasgow University, and we kind of hit it off. And he persuaded me to do a PhD and found funding and stuff like that. So I did this. I actually had two supervisors. I had a business professor who was, what I was doing is outside of a clear academic discipline. I'm fascinated with culture and with differences between culture and with cross-cultural communication. And to some extent, cross-cultural communication never actually happens. It's always pretty loose and pretty. It's never easy, put it that way, and it's often badly wrong. So I was looking there at this identity issue between the way that non-Scots see Scots and the way that Scots see themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I put that, notionally at least, into a marketing framework, because one of my supervisors was in the business department. He understood that sort of language and so on. So it was kind of a bit betwixt and between. And through doing that, I got into the piping scene. Well, I was already kind of in the piping scene a bit, although I'm not a piper. But it's a fascinating instrument because it has a drone, which was the medieval norm. And the thing about bagpipes is that they occur in all these different forms all the way across Europe. And so as a part of the PhD, I was able to amplify this interest, and it took me through to, amazing experiences. I became the vice president of the Italian Bagpipe Association. Now, I love Italy. It was just a fantastic place. I made really good friends there. I experienced tremendous hospitality in Italy. But the same thing in Bulgaria, for example. I wound up partying there and stuff with Islamic gypsies who have a fabulous bagpiping tradition of their own. Took me to Spain, to the Baltic, France, Czech Republic, all around. And these would be for somewhat extended periods. And I'd always be staying with people locally, local cultural advocates. So they were very interesting people. And I made a lot of very interesting and often quite deep friendships from that, which are still with me. That's if you plow through my Facebook friends, you'll find that they're somewhat scattered.
It's interesting that you weren't a piper yourself, but you picked up on this huge cultural influence of bagpipes across Europe, and you've obviously developed a real passion for listening to the music as well as writing about the music and all the experiences. Does the bagpipe stir the cockles of your heart in some way?
Well, yes and no. There are some forms of the bagpipe across Europe. I mean, they're very different instruments. The Italian zampogna is one that I love. The Bulgarians have a very powerful, beautiful instrument. And I went there I was taken there to meet a guy who is one of their leading players and pipe makers. He lived in Gala, in the Rhodope Mountains. Gala is one of the purported birthplaces of the Greek, what's his name? The origins of music.
Pythagoras.
Orpheus, is it? No, Orpheus. The myth.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Was born allegedly in Gala. So, with bagpipes, you don't just hit on the moment. You often hit on stories that lead you way, way deeper into the cultures. And that's what fascinated me. And the people and their interest in wider folk music, traditional music, and the cultural character of these people and of their musics. So that was really what got me going.
We had a question just come through from a Facebook, and it was from Stuart McAdam, who's a young writer, and he's been listening so far, and he will be aware that we're talking about you as a writer, both in a journalistic, an academic, and a little bit later on we'll be talking about your book, You Can't Be Serious, Essays in Wonder. But Stuart's asked this kind of immediate question, what makes a good writer? And I'd really quite like to put it into the mix at this point, because it's got a lot to do, I think, with the experiences you had in your journalistic phase.
I think you have to be... well, it helps if you're crazy to start with, because there's no money in it. You spend long, very frustrating hours at your keyboard. But I think it takes an abnormal, almost a pathological curiosity about human nature, about just the way people work. So there's that curiosity is a big thing. I think you have to have a very stable value system, because you need a point of view. You've got to have a place to stand. It's the Toranga Waiwe thing, Māori Toranga Waiwe, place to stand. So you need your feet on the ground. And you need an almost self-flagellating honesty. You have to be very aware of your own flaws and of the flaws of others around you, and also of their virtues, though, and their strengths. And you have to, I think you really have to love people. I don't know that I could be bothered writing about things that I really didn't like them.
Well, I find that quite fascinating, because as a minister, the kind of things that I write are often about not so much people, but situations that are unlovable. And that's where you need your point of view. That's where you do need a place to stand, because say you're describing in a sermon a situation of family violence, or something that's gone terribly wrong. For example, I once did a funeral. A funeral director called me in. He said, "I've got a young couple. They've had an infant, 2-year-old infant. Do the burial." He just gave me nothing, and he said, "We'll just do it as a graveside thing." And I showed up and I did what I did. It was only later that I learned that the hospital authorities were really very suspicious of this infant's death. And to be able to say things, it's not necessarily always about people. It can be about the situations in which people find themselves. So I think that's I think your idea of the tūranga waiwai is really important for being a writer. Mike, I'm also fascinated by the fact that you are, I can only describe it as a huge dilettante. You're like a little butterfly on Facebook that flips around the globe and pulls in hundreds of pieces. I don't know how many pieces of info that you pull in. And of course, we've got to cull them, and, not everyone responds to everything, but you do have
Well, you should.
No, they shouldn't. They've got to be more discerning. But you've got an eye for picking some really newsworthy stories. Again, is that part of the journalist-writer lenses that you wear?
Yeah, the journalism thing I'm not sure about, because to tell you the truth, I doubt the value of most of what we get as news, especially these days. And it used to frustrate me that when you write a news story, you don't have the space or the time to write about what led up to whatever the news incident is. And you stop at a point where, in a sense, one narrative may seem to end, but by the time it actually goes to air or is in print, everybody there has moved on. They've found better things to do. So you're reading. I'm not quite sure really what you get from news. You get an impression that is often taken, and people serve their own interests and their own prejudices, confirm their own prejudices with this. I had a friend and I, we both worked for CKWS, a radio station in Kingston, and they were doing, it was after the Kingston penitentiary riots, which were very bloody and very awful and terrible. And they were letting inmates do day release leading up to their time of their end of their sentence. And we did this in-depth piece showing how brilliant that was, how appropriate, how fitting, how sensible, how effective it was to let people into the workplace before they were actually thrown out of jail, when all of those, to the extent that they're support systems, but those were cut off once they were out of jail, and they may have a probation officer or something like that, but they still would have to focus on a major readjustment. Prison tends to make people very withdrawn and very introverted. Most workplaces require people to interact with other people and things like this. These guys are usually scared, they're usually uncertain, they usually have very low self-esteem. It's all been knocked down. And we kind of explained this and said how great the system was. And whenever we'd meet people afterwards, they'd say, oh, isn't it a great idea to keep those guys locked up? You know, shouldn't be letting them out like that. So they're prejudiced. They just use this stuff to reinforce their own prejudices, which was very disappointing to us. Mm. So newswork has lots of frustrations.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of the instance of Donald Trump has recently taken to criticizing Canadian farmers, I think, for destroying the agricultural industry in North America. Is that right? Donald Trump, have you heard of that guy?
No.
No,
I don't know who you're talking about. It may be. These names probably been in the news. Never mind. No, I try to. I've got 3 passports. Let me tell you that. And every time I go through the United States, I get absolutely grilled by these hostile, nasty, ignorant little vipers that they have been working in Homeland Security. So, yeah, I try not to be too concerned about what happens there. But I mean, I think it's a very dangerous situation there.
Yeah.
I worry far less about North Korea, quite honestly.
Yeah, we won't pursue this, but I always do ask about what people think about Donald Trump in these live on air interviews, and I haven't had a particularly overwhelming positive response for the first 100 days of the presidency. Mike, I would like to move now to your book, You Can't Be Serious, Essays in Wonder. Now, I did a very brief review of this on Amazon when it first came out, and I was quite entranced by it.
Thank you.
I think it's quintessentially Kiwi, but then I may be reading the signals a little bit incorrectly. It could be just as quintessentially Canadian, I suspect, in some ways, because what you have is a capacity for awe, for wonder about the natural world. You have a care and a concern for environment. You have a care and concern for people and cultures. This is a smorgasbord of ideas. Sure, I've got a few criticisms about the layout and the typography and minor things like that, but I wanted to give it a 5-star. I think I said it's 4.5 stars from me, apart from these typographical things. I thought essay You Can't Be Serious really is a wonderful testimony to your kind of life's experience, not just work, but the total experience. Would you like to tell us about the book and what it means to you and what are the big ideas in it?
Well, I was working on 2 novels at the time. I still am. But these little snippets and things kept nudging into the progress I was making with the fiction. And so what I was doing, I was just writing them down, chucking them in a folder, on my computer. I was just, because I find I have to write those things out, or else they kind of just take over, and you kind of you kind of get locked into the wrong things. So, but if you write them down, then you get them out of your head, you move on with what your real intentions are. And then one day I realized that I had quite a swag of material in there, and I started looking at it and realized, well, this is actually about something deeper than what I'm really getting at with these novels, and that was when I was going deeper in a way that I was producing this stuff. So it kind of wrote itself, and then I realized that I had that it was worth a book on it in its own way. So you find there's little bits of poetry in there, and there's little sort of bits of made-up story, and there's real story, and there's bits of news, and there's bits of history, and there's all sorts of things there. It's a smorgasbord. But you said about my life being pretty all over the place, but actually there's a couple of things that unite it, and what's motivated me and what draws me on. One is beauty. One of my activities is photographing wildflowers, and they change day to day here in Canada. The seasons are short and they change, but there's incredible beauty there, and they're things that people don't see because they drive around in cars these days. I'm talking about what lives in the ditches. It's not exactly the first place people go looking for beauty, but it's there. So beauty is one of the things, and the other thing is not quite sure how to put it. It is really wonder. Everything. Well, I don't believe there's such a thing as just an action. Everything is an interaction. We don't just act. We act on something or with something. It's always an interaction. And in every interaction, I think there's meaning. And wonder is one of the responses I have to that. So that really that's why the subtitle for the book, it's Essays in Wonder. And there are some things I think that stand in people's way of wonder these days. And one of the worst is fear. Fear is promulgated by news media, it's promulgated by politicians, it's promulgated by employers, it's promulgated by the economic system that we have, and in some cases it's even promulgated by churches and people who should be doing the exact opposite. It's so easy to get caught up in that. If you look at most of what you find on, let's say, Netflix. Sue and I go to Netflix occasionally to try and find an uplifting movie, which is a bit like, needles and haystacks, but there's this obsession with ugliness, with violence, with fear, with failure. And then we wonder why our society is, in a bit of a mess.
It's sort of like there's so much Nordic noir that we can't escape it.
Yeah, but I blame, in a way, I don't blame science itself, but this kind of mindset that it has about certainty. When you really look into science, you find that everything that we know dissolves into mystery. Like matter is mystery. We haven't a clue what it is. We look up to the sky, we look out wider and wider, and we haven't a clue what's up. And yet we kind of trust some of the most sort of odious little petty rubbish nonsense things that are presented to us by our society and by our entertainment media. You go for a walk along the road here, and you walk along and you look in the ditches, which everybody else is driving at. Here are these little gems of beauty, these little wildflowers. We don't stop to look at the beauty. We don't take it in. We don't let it lift our souls. To me, beauty is a precursor to religion. When we are animated by beauty, we aren't in a state of denial. We're in a state of wonder. We're open to and looking for meaning.
Do you think, Mike, that part of the problem is that the world the world actually doesn't really look at science, but it looks at what I call scientism. I think that's a pretty standard term for it.
Yeah.
And scientism promulgates all these answers in exactly the same way that materialism promulgates all the answers, in exactly the same way that the economic theories promulgate answers. You know, if you do this and expand this, you'll get richer. And all of these isms are ideologies rather than the actual substance of the subjects. The substance of the subjects, like economics, originally meant how do you include everyone in the whole household so they can participate and gain meaningful work, bread, employment, etc. Science originally meant that awe and wonder.
That's a nonsense, though, isn't it, really? And like, we have an economic system. You look at it, it impoverishes far more people than it enriches. Why are we in awe of the economy? Why do you want money? Money doesn't do anything for you. You need to be right in yourself before money will do anything for you. And even then you don't want it. I mean, I have no interest in money, to tell you the truth. I mean, I wouldn't know what to do with it. If I don't buy lottery tickets because I'm against the lottery. I don't buy lottery tickets because I wouldn't want to win $5 million. It would completely ruin my lifestyle.
Yeah.
It really would. I wouldn't have friends. You wouldn't be able to go around Europe the way I did if you had money and stayed in hotels. You wouldn't meet anybody. We don't have that. We're too afraid to engage with people, other people. Here, it's better in New Zealand, I think. It's still, but I mean, I love cooking. And we like to invite people to our homes. In Canada, that seems to happen very seldom. I know it happened in New Zealand, certainly when we were there quite a bit. We would have people in for meals a couple of times a week. And we'd go for... Now that seems to me a absolutely elemental part of what the gospel says. We do a Eucharist at church, which is all about that sharing and that eating and drinking together. Jesus did it with real bread and real wine. It was robust and it was real. And we take that down, so we don't want to, rock too many boats, but we don't take that spirit home with us very easily often. So we tend to be private and we tend to grow in, and the more private we become, the more afraid we become of the society we live in, and the more afraid of the society we become. The kind of uglier we get, the less we see of beauty, the less we see of wonder. And fear, I think, is the driver of that, and fear is so unnecessary. We don't need to be afraid. And strangers are more interesting than that.
There's a wonderful quote. I mean, there are many wonderful quotes, bits and pieces that you've pulled out in Essays in Wonder, but there's a marvelous quote from the 4th century AD, I think it's Augustine, where you've got Augustine saying, look, what we call Christianity has always existed. It existed before Jesus and before they invented the term Christianity. Augustine said that the whole religion has always been there and always will be there. We've just put some new names and fitted some ideas. Now, Augustine, of course, is the key theologian of not only the ancient world, but determined so much of what went on, to the present day. And I thought that was a very powerful and telling quotation. And it seemed to me, when I read your book, you're not trying to push any doctrinal thing for one religion over another or anything like that, but you do have this main, I'll call it a theological idea, that somehow there is goodness, beauty, truth and meaning for people, and it's there as a backdrop everywhere. Is that the main theological idea you were trying to get across?
I think, I think the big thing, it comes down to fear. And that, fear not. That just appears time after time and page after page after page in Scripture. And we kind of cruise past that. We kind of, I think, often cruise past that. I don't hear too many statements, from churches about we don't have to be afraid. And if we don't challenge the fear, we are letting people stay in a state of kind of spiritual paralysis. Fear is terribly destructive of faith, I think. And the other thing is, too, that, we made the mistake, I think, in Christendom of really with the whole kind of age of reason, and it's now with scientism and so on, that we're trying to communicate history instead of faith. We like to say, I find it interesting, much more interesting than Jesus saying it, but I mean, in a way, looking at his teachings, and you find that guy Motzi, Chinese guy, 500 years before Jesus, saying, love your enemy. This was his teaching, love your enemy. He built defenses and he built siege engines. And he knew that the only way to stop this craziness was to actually love your enemy. That meant feeding them. It meant looking after them. It meant talking with them. It meant interacting with them, hosting them, bringing them into your, Asia, Middle East, Polynesia, traditions of hospitality are very strong. What inhibits it? In the West, I think fear. We're afraid of our neighbours. We're afraid of everybody. It's so sad. We're taught to love. We do shout love, and everything kind of clicks into place. It makes, when you look at some of those components of Christianity and their history, you find that they're actually room there to solve all our problems. What Jesus may have done, and I'm not going to argue that there was only one character who called Jesus and it's a historical thing. The whole of the Bible is oral stories, oral narratives. Every culture has these. And they're not about literalism, they're not about history or science. They're about within the structure within us. They're about the bigger truths that pump our hearts, that fire our imaginations. We can have any number of facts and have dead emotions and dead imaginations. This is where we need faith. We need everybody. Anthropologists have never found a functioning society that works where there's no religion, there's no faith. Now that doesn't mean that religion is always perfect, is always going to solve everybody. Religions get sick too. I mean, that's why you get crusades, because it gets tangled up with all sorts of materialistic goals and ambitions. But when it's the way that Jesus taught it and the way that Jesus lived, it's harmony. You get food, you share it. Everybody does that. There's food to go around. We've created these like the Congo. How come they can afford so many guns and not enough food? Well, that's because the West is in there pouring in guns and ripping off all the natural resources that would feed people otherwise. We live in very cruel society. We're Rome. We live in Rome. It's an imperialistic, greedy, grasping, domineering culture. And when you're brought up in it and you live it too easily, you think, well, we're nice people, we're decent people, we're good people. It's them that do it. It's businesses that do that. Well, we're part of that. And we don't really absolutely have to be.
Hey, that was really well put, Mike. Is there any final one point that you'd like to get across about your life, your work, before we draw tonight's live on air to a close?
The hope is that the book is something that people will enjoy reading and maybe be a bit challenged by it, but I hope it's not too uncomfortable. But if it prompts people to think about their own situation and maybe claim a bit more space for their own spirituality, their own beauty, and let that widen, they'll change lives, their own but others as well. And we can do that, I say, and one of the last bits of the book is about the way that we are very flexible in the way we can communicate. And we can communicate with each other. We can enjoy each other. We can be hospitable to each other. We can laugh. We can have fun. And we can be Christian. And I consider myself a Christian, but I mean, a pretty eccentric one, I think. That's just it.
I'm sure a lot of people would agree with that, Mike.
I've got Islamic friends who I've got, where these conversations can be cross-cultural, and that's that cultural gaps that thrill me and delight me and make me interested in human beings.
Well, I think just everything about this book has that quality that just emanates from it, that you are interested in people and their ideas.
I love people, David. I love people.
Well, what a fantastic comment that is. Mike, in the About section of the YouTube video, we'll put the link to Amazon so people can purchase the book through Amazon. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll say goodbye from New Zealand.
Thank you for your interest, David. And thank you